There are a ton of video games that have been adapted into poorly received films. But we can't help but wonder, what if we worked the other way around? What if we adapted movies into games, working with surefire concepts that could draw in gamers who are already devoted fans of cult classics and successful blockbusters? Today, we are jumping into hypothetical land to question exactly that. Specifically within the horror genre, with our list of the top 10 horror movies that should be games. Warning friends, there are a few movie spoilers on this list, but nothing too revealing, so you should be okay. With that in mind, let's get to it. In at number 10, It. It is ripe with potential. Pennywise the Clown can take the shape of your worst fears and nightmares, meaning there is an endless stream of possibilities as to the kinds of horrors you could come face to face with in this title. It would likely function at best as a linear horror title, even one that borrowed mechanics from the likes of Until Dawn, where we play as members of the iconic Losers Club in both their childhood and adult years. But unlike Until Dawn, you'd be faced with boss battles, most of which involve simply just surviving or evading Pennywise, up until you release specific boss battles like the face-off with the spider creature at the end of the most recent It film, where defeating it is an inevitable must. Adding a more twisted dynamic to the game to raise the stakes could be fun as well. The decisions you make will determine if members of the Losers Club get killed off, making the game that much harder if, by the time you reach adulthood, most of your friends are dead. Could be really bleak too, but also, like, satisfying. In at 9, The Strangers. This 2008 home invasion film could be adapted into a simple concept video game chock full of quality scares. The movie depicts a married couple fighting for their lives amidst a break-in of 3 masked murderers who take advantage of their isolated vacation home. Imagine playing a first-person title where you are defenseless, much like many of the other popular survivor horror games out there nowadays. But instead of ghouls or monsters or other supernatural threats, your predators are humans, and you need to figure out a way to either escape or hunt the hunters. In addition to that, your actions can't compromise the life of your partner, putting you in a precarious situation. Sure, you might be able to break out and survive, but that could mean that your husband or wife gets offed in the process when you burst through a window or something like that and make a run for it. Consider the house a sandbox, similar to the recent Hitman titles where anything can be a weapon or a distraction, and there are multiple ways to get out alive. Or die. And at number 8, Train to Busan. Train to Busan is a fantastic Korean horror film that takes place on a train during a sudden zombie apocalypse breakout. The story begins with us following an absentee father and his young daughter, the former taking the latter to see her mother in Busan for her birthday. As the train departs, a woman who has been bitten by a zombie boards the train, and eventually infects other passengers. As the film progresses, we see a group of civilians, including the father-daughter duo, struggling to survive the narrow confines of the train and make it to Busan, where it is presumed to be a safe haven from the spread of the zombie virus. So why would this make such a great video game? A large part of the film requires the characters on board to use stealth tactics to avoid getting mauled to death by hordes of zombies. It's partially a survival horror mixed with some melee battles, where several characters, in order to get to a different part of the train, need to beat down on the zombies to get through. And the train does stop at 2 locations where the characters are bombarded by zombie hordes yet again, making it for a dynamic journey. And at 7, The Purge. The Purge seems like an obvious choice for this list. The concept behind the Purge films is that, in order to combat prison overcrowding and violence in general, the US allows an annual 12-hour time period in which crime is entirely legal. Some go on a rampage, others fend for their survival, and everyone in the audience likely considered what they would do if they were put in that dire situation. Now imagine that concept but tossed into an open-world MMORPG. With sophisticated game mechanics, it could allow players to get into all sorts of trouble and depravity, to the point where we wouldn't be surprised to see the game get banned in several countries if it were to ever be made and released. There could even be a difficulty setting in which you can join servers that run for a full 12 hours straight, making the game an intense marathon of sorts. There could even be a battle royale mode that would alert you as to how many people are left alive on your server, if that's how you choose to play the game. Oh, the options are endless. And at number 6, The Howling. There aren't a ton of video games out there that center around werewolves. Now this is one of the reasons why an adaptation of the 1981 film The Howling would be great. Not only is it arguably one of the best werewolf films out there, but its locale could make for a contained online title ripe with potential. Imagine this. Similar to the game Friday the 13th or Dead by Daylight, you get to choose a character with a specific playstyle who gets sent to this secluded psychiatric resort called the Colony. Each server has one individual who is the werewolf, a character who runs around and hunts the other players, transforming them one by one into werewolves. When you're bitten, you get to hunt the remaining survivors too. But be wary. Survivors can get their mitts on silver bullets and corrosive acid, the former killing you off and the latter severely hindering your gameplay for a handful of seconds, allowing players to escape your grasp. Speaking of supernatural creatures though, in at our next number 5, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Okay, so we're cheating a little bit on this number, giving you a television show rather than a movie, although once upon a time it was a movie first, but let's just ignore that. The world of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a beloved one. The show, a nostalgic trip back to the 90s and early 2000s nowadays, followed a teenage vampire slayer attempting to save the world all while trying to maintain a regular life in high school and later in college. It's all about never quite fitting in and coming of age, but mixed with demons, vampires, and a bunch of other terrifying supernatural concoctions. With the upcoming revival show in the works, it would be amazing to see an open world RPG emerge, in which you play as a vampire slayer, or Buffy, because you know we'd be super down for Buffy, who is forced to tackle a plethora of sinister supernatural threats crawling their way out of the Hellmouth, all while maintaining the facade of a high school student. Kind of like the Persona games, but relying on the lore of the series created by Joss Whedon. In at 4, A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place got rave reviews when it came out for successfully creating a world in which dialogue was not heavily relied upon, and sound design amplified the tension in a mesmerizing way. The creatures in the film were rarely seen, with the focus being set rather on a family trying to survive in a world where making the slightest sound could result in your immediate death. Now imagine the potential a story like that could have as a stealth survival video game. From searching for supplies to defending your home, there's a ton of material in A Quiet Place that could be used to construct a scary as hell open world video game. Moving on to number 3, Cube. We imagine a concept like Cube would translate really well into an indie horror. The 1997 film follows a group of strangers who wake up in a maze of absurd rooms, some of which are booby-trapped, others that are entirely safe, so death could literally be around any corner. There's a few ways Cube would work as a game. The first is as a horror puzzle game, like Portal but deadlier and scarier. The second, and arguably more intriguing, is a game in which you and 3 other players play online, wake up inside of this prison-esque environment, and all start off at different parts of the map. Eventually you work your way into finding one another, or avoiding one another. Each of you has a different skill set, making some rooms easier to navigate than others. And to make it even more difficult, psychological elements the likes of the paranoia that we see in games like Amnesia could really make for conflict amongst teammates. Ultimately, you can choose to save yourself or help save the group, adding further tension to the dynamic between players. And you know, Cube would also make a really great escape room in real life too, just saying. And at number 2, The Thing. John Carpenter's The Thing is an amazing film. Using practical effects, it takes elements of cosmic horror and manifests them into gruesome and guttural creatures that can't be defined but are the stuff of nightmare fuel. Much of the tension in the film is caused by a lack of trust in between the characters. Who has been infected by the Thing? Who is trying to manipulate whom? And what must you do in order to survive? Rather than it being an open world game, we see it more as a type that uses the action consequence mechanics of games like Until Dawn. It could prove successful in a horror survival title like this, with dire mistakes and judgment leading to you or your companions being killed off. Mix in a solid dose of paranoia and misdirection, and we could really have a good psychological horror on our hands with this. It's actually worth noting that there was a semi-successful game adaptation by Computer Artworks for The Thing that was released back in 2002 that worked as a direct sequel to the events of the movie, but the capabilities of technology nowadays could make for a much more immersive title. And last but not least, in at number 1, The Shining. If you've seen Ready Player One, the movie, this number likely already crossed your mind. A video game version of Stephen King's The Shining, combined with the aesthetic of the film directed by Stanley Kubrick, could make for one of the most horrific video game experiences of all time. Someone call up Hideo Kojima and get him to direct this. We imagine a Shining game play out like a psychological horror in the same vein as PT, but throughout the expanse of an empty hotel, and featuring a bunch of horrors just like the stuff that we see in the Shining film. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but like, that would terrify the crap out of me. Just take my money. Alright, there we have it, friends. What other movies do you think would make great video games? Give us a shout in those comments below and let us know, and hey, maybe we'll do a part 2. If you guys dug this video, spread that love, hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe to Top 10 Gaming for more lists just like this one. We'd love it if you guys stuck around with us some more. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next video.